Welcome back to another excruciatingly boring, yet a mildly disturbing episode of the Boring History Channel. Today we will wander very slowly through the dim, cold, and downright unpleasant corridors of the medieval world. But before we begin, remember to like, subscribe, and smash that bell icon, or don't, because nothing matters. Now, let's take a slow, gloomy, uncomfortable walk into the creepy truths of medieval times. Brace yourself for about forever. Imagine, if you will, a world where confessing your sins wasn't encouraged through soft words, but by having your limbs slowly stretched until they simply stopped working. This wasn't some underground practice. It wasn't hidden in dark alleys. It was justice, approved, sanctioned, celebrated. Let's begin with the most delightfully uncomfortable torture device, the rack. The rack. A wooden frame, ropes attached to both your wrists and ankles. And with every turn of the handle, your body was stretched and stretched and stretched until your joints popped. They weren't going for a light stretch here, like some medieval yoga sessions. They were aiming for dislocated shoulders, snapped ligaments, torn muscles, all for the sake of truth. Can you hear that? That's the sound of your medieval ancestors whimpering. But it gets worse. Another popular favorite was the scavenger's daughter. This charming device did the opposite of the rack. Instead of pulling you apart, it crushed you inwards. They'd bind your head, hands, and legs together and slowly tighten until you bled from your nose, your ears, and even your fingernails. The goal wasn't simply to cause pain. The goal was to reduce a human body into a leaking bag of confession. During the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, torture wasn't just allowed. It was an official tool of the government. They even had a man called the Lieutenant of the Tower of London, whose job was to decide which torture method fit the occasion. A job. Imagine that at a job interview. Tell us about your previous experience with the rack and thumb screws. Oh yes, I'm quite efficient. People talk about the good old days, but if you accidentally said the wrong thing back then, you didn't get cancelled on social media. You got the iron boot. An iron boot was placed on your leg. Molten metal was poured inside. Let's take a deep breath and think about that. The Black Death. The plague that swept through Europe in the mid-1300s. Historians estimate it killed between 75 to 200 million people. Let's pause and digest that number slowly. 75 million. Bodies piled up faster than they could bury them. But here's the part they don't tell you in history class. During the worst of it, people would sometimes wall themselves inside their homes. They would board the windows, nail the doors closed, and sit in darkness, waiting to die. No medicine, no hope. Outside, the streets are filled with carts, and the dreaded cry echoed through every alley. Bring out your dead. Imagine standing by your window, hearing that bell ring, knowing you might be next. Some towns tried desperate measures. In Strasbourg, they tried to dance it away. Yes, they danced. Hundreds of people began dancing in the streets non-stop, for days. Many died of heart attacks or sheer exhaustion. Historians still debate whether it was a mass psychosis, a fungal poisoning from contaminated bread, or something worse. Whatever the cause, it didn't stop the deaths. To prevent plague, doctors recommended sitting between two large fires, carrying dead snakes in your pocket, drinking crushed emeralds mixed with wine. That was the science. Can you imagine living through that? And so, we've only begun to scratch the moldy, flea-infested surface of medieval horrors, torture, disease, dancing madness. And trust me, this was only the beginning. Let us now drift further into the unsettling. In the year 897 AD, something happened so absurdly, so grotesque, that it sounded like a fever dream. It was called the Cadaver Synod. Here is the story. Pope Formosus, a man once seated on the highest throne of Christendom, had died, but his successor, Pope Stephen VI, was not fond of Formosus. Not fond at all. So what did Stephen do? He had Formosus's corpse dug up, dressed it in papal robes, and placed the decomposing body on trial. Yes, they actually dragged a rotting corpse into court, sat it on a throne, and charged it with crimes. A deacon was assigned to speak on behalf of the, very quiet defendant. The accusations? Violating church laws, assuming the papacy illegally. During the trial, witnesses gagged from the stench. The corpse's fingers fell off. And the outcome? Formosus was found guilty. His papacy was declared null. They stripped his body of sacred robes, cut off the 3 fingers he used to bless people, and tossed him into the Tiber River. Some say the body later washed up on shore. A few even claimed it began performing miracles. But most simply remembered the spectacle as one of the most disturbing and embarrassing episodes in the history of the Catholic Church. Reflective pause. Let that sit for a moment. Imagine a courtroom today, with a rotting corpse as the defendant, and people say modern politics is bad. Long before Bram Stoker ever wrote about Dracula, the medieval world was already obsessed with vampires. Villagers in Eastern Europe believed that certain corpses refused to stay dead. Signs of a vampire included a bloated corpse, blood seeping from the mouth, red, flushed cheeks. Today, we understand these are just natural parts of decomposition, but back then, they believed these were signs the corpse had been feasting on the living. So what did they do? They opened the graves, and what they found horrified them. Corpses that appeared too fresh, bodies that looked swollen and red. Panicked, they took extreme measures. They drove wooden stakes through hearts. Some burned the bodies, others decapitated them. In some cases, they placed bricks or stones inside the corpse's mouth to prevent it from biting. These rituals were documented extensively, and they weren't rare. Entire villages participated, all in the name of safety. In 2006, archaeologists found a skeleton in Venice with a brick shoved in its mouth. Proof that these terrifying practices were very real. You think it's hard dealing with your neighbors today. At least they aren't accusing you of being a blood-sucking revenant. Yet, now we arrive at the medieval medical marvel known as bloodletting. For centuries, doctors believed that all diseases came from imbalances of 4 bodily humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile, and if you had too much blood, simple, you had to get rid of it, so they drained it. Doctors used razors, knives, leeches. They would open a vein and let you bleed. This was used to treat almost everything: fevers, headaches, plague, sore throats. Yes, even for a common cold. Some patients fainted, some died, but it was considered cutting-edge science. Picture this. You go to your medieval doctor with a slight cough. You leave with fewer pints of blood, and probably fewer days to live. So far, we've only touched upon the edge of the abyss: torture, plague, corpse trials, vampire panics, bloodletting. And yet, this was considered normal. In our next chapter, we will explore even darker practices: accidental live burials, public execution festivals, witch burnings. Prepare yourself. The medieval world only gets darker from here. But that's a tale for another dreary, unsettling, yet irresistibly boring episode. Until then, remember, history isn't just written in books. Sometimes it's buried in shallow graves. In an age before modern medicine, the line between life and death was unclear. Very unclear. Doctors lacked the means to confirm death reliably. A person in a deep coma or in shock from illness might appear lifeless, pale, cold, unmoving. Villagers, fearful of spreading disease, would hastily bury the body. It was not uncommon for coffins to later be discovered, with scratch marks on the inside, signs of struggle. Some bodies were found twisted, fingers torn from desperate clawing. An unimaginable horror. In some regions, they began to implement safety measures. A rope was tied to the corpse's hand. That rope led above ground, attached to a bell. If the buried person awoke, they could ring the bell, the origin of the phrase "saved by the bell," though charming in modern usage. Its roots are anything but. Imagine lying there, in the dark, underground, gasping for air, pulling the rope. I hope someone hears. And what if they don't? Despite all its gloom and doom, medieval life wasn't without its festivities. One of the most anticipated forms of entertainment, public executions. Yes. Whole families would gather in town squares. Merchants would sell food and drinks. Children would sit on their parents' shoulders to witness the spectacle of justice. Executions varied by crime and location. Beheadings, hangings, burnings at the stake, drawn and quartered. Beheadings were considered humane. A swift chop if the executioner was skilled. But others were intentionally slow. Some criminals were burned alive over hours. Others disemboweled publicly, and the crowd cheered. It was a grand day out. In 17th century England, execution days were almost holiday-like. Bakers even sold souvenirs, pastries shaped like gallows. Today we binge crime documentaries. They watched it live, and they brought snacks. Finally, we arrive at the most infamous chapter of medieval hysteria, the witch hunts. Though witchcraft trials spanned centuries, their roots lie in medieval paranoia. Anyone could be accused. Old women, healers, midwives. Accusations were enough to ruin lives. Trials often involved torture to extract confessions. Tests included dunking. If you floated, you were guilty. Pricking, searching for insensitive spots believed to be the devil's mark. Most accused never stood a chance. Confession was followed by punishment. Typically, death by fire. In towns across Europe, thousands were burned. Their crime? Being feared. Between the 15th and 18th centuries, tens of thousands died in witch hunts, many simply because they were outsiders. Fear has a way of spreading, sometimes faster than fire. We have now wandered through the shadows of medieval life. Torture, disease, vampires, live burials, public executions, witch burnings. A world where horror wasn't fiction. It was a daily routine. And yet, somehow, civilization survived. Or did it? Perhaps, deep down, some of these fears never left. They merely changed forms. Until next time, when we will explore even deeper sleep. Well, good night.